Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the chilling 1959 Dyatlov Pass incident. We're going to treat the facts of this infamous, bizarre event like a literal cold case to uncover exactly what happened out there on Dead Mountain. It's one of those stories that's engrossed researchers for over half a century, because it perfectly blends wilderness survival, strange science, and, you guessed it, Cold War secrecy. We got to start with a paradox that has totally baffled investigators for decades. Ask yourself, why on earth would survival experts abandon their only shelter without boots or heavy coats, right in the middle of a deadly winter storm? We're talking minus 25 degrees Celsius here. Leaving that tent meant certain death. And yet, for some reason, all 9 hikers fled in an absolute panic.
And the bizarre autopsy results? Well, they just deepened the mystery. Dr. Boris Vozrogeny, the forensic examiner back in 1959, revealed that some of the victims suffered internal trauma equal to a high-speed car crash. But, and this is the crazy part, there wasn't a single scratch on the surface of their skin. No way, right? Well, that sets the stage for a truly chilling investigation.
Section 1. Journey to Dead Mountain.
All right, let's rewind the clock and retrace the steps of Igor Dyatlov and his team of students. Now, keep in mind, these were not amateurs. They were highly experienced mountaineers embarking on a trek of the highest category of difficulty. The expedition began totally normally in late January. Train, sled, pushed into the wilderness, the usual stuff. But on February 1st, they deviated slightly from their planned route. Because of dropping temperatures and insane winds, they pitched their tent on the ominous open slopes of Holat Shakal, a name that actually translates to Dead Mountain in the indigenous Mansi language.
So they were supposed to return by mid-February. When they didn't, a massive search operation kicked off. Weeks later, searchers discovered an eerie scene, a collapsed tent almost completely buried in snow. And upon closer inspection, rescuers noticed something weird. The tent had been sliced open from the inside. Oh, and almost all of their cold weather gear, their boots, their supplies, just sitting there, perfectly intact inside the tent.
Section 2. The Macabre Discovery. What the rescuers found scattered down that slope over the next few months transformed a missing persons case into a literal nightmare. Investigators found 9 sets of footprints walking away from the tent. Some were barefoot, some in just socks. When the bodies were finally located, 6 had died of hypothermia, which, makes sense in the freezing cold. But 3 died of fatal, crushing injuries. And to make matters even stranger, high doses of radiation were found on some of their clothing. Plus, the bodies found months later in a ravine were actually missing soft facial tissues, like eyes and a tongue.
As these bodies were recovered from the snow and brought to the morgue, the sheer strangeness of the injuries forced investigators to search for answers way beyond the obvious. I mean, how do you explain shattered ribs and crushed skulls with 0 external bruising? And why were they glowing with radiation? The initial Soviet investigation actually closed the case by stating they were killed by an unknown compelling force.
Section 3. Theory 1. The avalanche.
But come on, science demands a better answer than an unknown compelling force, right? The most common explanation for mountain tragedies is natural disaster. In 2019, Russian prosecutors and later Swiss researchers pointed to a specific type of snow collapse called a slab avalanche. Unlike the massive, roaring avalanches you see in Hollywood movies, a slab avalanche is a dense, cohesive block of ice and snow that just silently detaches and drops.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the contrast between the eras of investigation. While the 1959 investigators quickly dismissed an avalanche because the snow was too shallow and the footprints were too perfectly preserved, modern science tells a totally different story. Computer models actually show that when the hikers cut into the slope to pitch their tent, combined with hurricane-force winds piling snow above them, they inadvertently created the perfect conditions for a delayed, localized snow block to collapse right onto them.
This theory does logically explain why they fled in such a panic. They thought they were being buried alive. It also explains how some sustain those crushing, car crash-like chest injuries from the sheer weight of a dense block of snow. Yet, it completely fails to account for the radiation found on their clothes, or, those bizarre missing body parts.
Section 4. Theory 2. Infrasound panic.
So if it wasn't an avalanche, could a nearly invisible natural phenomenon have literally terrified them to death? Atmospheric experts have proposed this super fascinating acoustic theory. They suggest that the fierce winds passing over the mountain's unique dome-like topography created what's called a Kármán vortex street. Basically, it's an effect that emits low-frequency infrasound waves. These sound waves are way below the threshold of human hearing, but they can induce severe panic, unexplainable fear, and literal physical illness in the human body.
Think of jagged structures on the mountain acting as natural wind tunnels. They could have blasted the vulnerable tent with these silent, terrifying sound waves. Over hours, this invisible assault could have driven the hikers completely out of their minds, forcing them to slice their way into the freezing night just to escape a terror they could feel but couldn't even see. Wild, right?
Section 5. Theory 3. Military testing.
But hey, nature might not actually be the culprit here. Pivoting to man-made horror, some researchers theorize the hikers inadvertently camped right smack in the middle of a testing zone for parachute mines. These are devastating weapons dropped from aircraft, suspended by a parachute, and designed to detonate in midair rather than on impact. When they explode above the ground, they generate a massive, localized concussive blast. This concussive wave causes devastating internal organ damage without breaking the skin or producing shrapnel, which honestly perfectly matches the baffling autopsy reports.
This military theory holds water for so many people because it perfectly aligns with the most inexplicable elements of the case. It explains the radioactive clothing. It explains why local villagers and even the lead investigator reported seeing glowing fireballs or orbs in the sky that night. And it for sure explains the Soviet government's sudden classification of the investigation files, not to mention the high-ranking military officials rushing in to control the narrative.
Section 6. The enduring mystery.
So, where does that actually leave us? Each theory offers an incredibly compelling piece of the puzzle, yet none can definitively close the case. Whether it was the raw power of a snow collapse, an invisible sonic terror driving them mad, or an accidental top-secret weapons strike, well, every explanation has logical gaps. For instance, the missing facial tissues, eyes, and tongues are actually best explained by simple animal predation, since those bodies lay submerged in a thawing creek for months. But animal predation doesn't explain radiation. An avalanche doesn't explain glowing orbs in the sky, and a military strike, that doesn't explain why there was absolutely no physical bomb debris found anywhere near the pristine campsite.
Ultimately, the 9 students resting at the cemetery took the absolute truth of that frigid February night right to their graves. They survived the treacherous ascent, they survived the bitter cold, but they could not survive whatever found them in the dark on Kholat Shakal.
We are left to wonder, gazing into the cold blue of the Ural Mountains, what could possibly be so horrifying, so immediately terrifying that slicing open your only shelter and running barefoot into a -25-degree blizzard was actually the better option? It's a question that ensures the Dyatlov Pass will remain one of history's most fascinating and haunting unsolved mysteries. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning everything.